Hey there, welcome back. Tonight, we were taking a quiet journey into the heart of Europe, into a summer that didn't yet know it would be its last. The year is 1914, and the air hums with peace that feels permanent, though it is anything but. So let's slow down, breathe a little, and drift back to a continent shimmering at the edge of an age, elegant, fragile, and unaware of the storm that waits beyond the horizon. All you have to do is settle in, get comfortable, and let the story drift over you, like the faint murmur of a waltz echoing through an open window somewhere in Vienna. Before we begin, a small note. If you enjoy these calm, slow journeys through the past, consider liking the video or subscribing, only if you truly enjoy it, and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love imagining this invisible constellation of listeners scattered across the night, each drifting into sleep beneath different skies. The story begins not with a gunshot, but with a sigh. Europe in 1914 is beautiful, proud, old, and glittering, with a kind of confidence only centuries can build. The great capitals hum with light. Paris, elegant and restless. Vienna, a waltzing empire of art and order. Berlin, industrial and sharp-edged. London, the beating heart of an empire that touches every sea. Steamships glide into harbors heavy with spices and silk. Trains hiss through green countrysides, carrying poets, businessmen, and schoolchildren who dream of the modern age. Across the fields of France, wheat ripples in the warm wind. Along the Danube, young lovers walk the bridges as violins play from cafe terraces. To most, the world feels stable, peaceful, even inevitable. The long 19th century, with its railways and reason, has given people faith in progress. There is talk of peace through prosperity, of science ending hunger, of machines making war impossible. The middle classes believe they've entered a permanent golden age. The newspapers, printed by new industrial presses, carry stories of invention, telephones, automobiles, flying machines. The modern world feels unstoppable. Yet beneath the calm, something brittle runs through Europe's veins. Old empires sit like statues, too long exposed to wind and rain, magnificent but cracked. The Austro-Hungarian Empire is vast and weary, its people a patchwork of languages and loyalties. The Ottoman Empire, its neighbor, is fading like an old map left in the sun. Russia still moves to the rhythm of horses and czars, even as factories rise on the horizon. And Germany, young and restless, hums with ambition, its cities pulsing with steel and pride. Diplomats talk in coded phrases, alliances whisper through corridors. The Triple Entente, Britain, France, and Russia, watching the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. Europe is a web of promises and fears. No one wants war, and yet no one can fully trust peace. Still, the summer of 1914 glows. In Berlin, young officers pose for photographs in crisp uniforms, their swords polished to mirrors. In Paris, the cafes overflow with laughter and absinthe. In London, the newspapers debate Irish Home Rule and the latest cricket results. In the countryside, children chase dragonflies across golden meadows, their voices echoing between hedgerows that will soon be lined with barbed wire. The arts flourish. Stravinsky's rhythms shock audiences. Picasso paints faces fractured by modernity. Freud writes of dreams and fears. Virginia Woolf sits at her desk, hearing the heartbeat of a century about to shatter. Everything seems alive, new, and limitless. The world has never felt so sure of itself, which is why its fall will feel so impossible. In Vienna, the heart of the old empire, the cafes are full of talk, of philosophy, politics, and the rising tension in the Balkans. Few truly understand it. The assassination of a minor archduke in Sarajevo will soon unravel this world, but in June 1914, it's just another headline among many. No one knows that in a matter of weeks, trains carrying lovers and letters will carry soldiers and shells instead. The smell of coal and perfume lingers in the air. The streets gleam after a summer rain. From balconies, orchestras play waltzes that drift down into the cobbled squares. The sound of carriages mixes with the distant hum of engines, the old and the new coexisting for the last time. In Russia, peasants harvest grain for the Tsar's empire. In Serbia, a handful of students talk of freedom. In Britain, suffragettes march for the right to vote, while miners strike for fair wages. In every country, the people believe they are shaping a brighter future. None imagine that within weeks, that future will be written in mud and blood. The churches are full on Sundays. The trains run on time. The markets are busy. Europe is breathing easily, unaware that it's dreaming on the edge of an abyss. A single shot, soon to be fired in Sarajevo, will wake it. But for now, the continent sleeps, content, luminous, and fragile. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear it. The whisper of pages turning, of a candle burning low, of a peaceful world exhaling for the very last time before the century begins to roar. Part 2. The Fuse, Sarajevo, 1914. The air is warm over the Balkans. It is June 28th, 1914, a Sunday. The city of Sarajevo wakes to sunlight, spilling across its tiled roofs and narrow streets. Church bells mingle with the call to prayer. A breeze carries the scent of bread from the market, and the sound of hooves on cobblestone echoes between the hills. No one knows that by afternoon the old world will begin to crack. In the streets, people line up to glimpse a motorcade. At its center sits Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, beside his wife, Sophie. Their open car glides past the river, its polished frame flashing in the morning light. For them, this is a ceremonial visit, a chance to be seen, to reassure a restless province that the empire still cares. They wear light summer clothes. Sophie smiles. The soldiers around them seem relaxed. A few streets away, a handful of young men wait. They are part of a secret nationalist group called Mlada Bosna, Young Bosnia. They dream of independence from the empire. Among them is a frail, pale 19-year-old named Gavrilo Princip. He holds a pistol in his pocket and a single belief in his heart that one act can change the course of history. The first attempt fails. A bomb is thrown and misses. The Archduke's car speeds ahead, shaken but unharmed. Crowds scatter, confusion ripples, and the procession continues. Later, as the Archduke insists on visiting the wounded in the hospital, his driver takes a wrong turn, right into a narrow street where Princip happens to be standing. 2 gunshots break the calm. They are sharp, almost small sounds, but their echo crosses oceans. Franz Ferdinand and Sophie die within minutes. The silence that follows feels heavier than the shots themselves. Sarajevo stands still, as if time is holding its breath. The crowd surges. The police seize Princip. Somewhere in the city, a church bell tolls. The Archduke's blood darkens the white fabric of his uniform, and far away, in Vienna, Berlin, St. Petersburg, Paris, and London, the machinery of alliances begins to turn. In the great capitals of Europe, the assassination is first treated as a tragedy, not a trigger. Newspapers print headlines in black ink: heir to the Austrian throne murdered. Yet behind the grief, cabinets and chanceries hum with calculation. For years, Europe has been divided by pacts that promise mutual defense. Now, those promises begin to move like clockwork. Austria-Hungary blames Serbia, suspecting that officials there supported the plot. Serbia, small but defiant, denies involvement. Russia, seeing itself as protector of all Slavic peoples, warns Vienna not to act too harshly. Germany, bound to Austria-Hungary by treaty, pledges support, whatever may come. Britain and France watch closely, balancing sympathy and fear. The diplomats speak in telegrams, words reduced to code and courtesy. But beneath the politeness, there is unease. The old order has been wounded, and no one can agree how to stop the bleeding. In Vienna, the Emperor AS ministers prepare an ultimatum to Serbia, a document so harsh that rejection is almost certain. They mean to make an example, to reassert the empire's fading power, but they move slowly, waiting weeks to deliver it. In that pause, Europe dreams again of calm, unaware that delay is only tightening the fuse. Cafes stay full, orchestras still play, lovers stroll through parks, and train stations hum as if nothing has changed. But diplomats feel the pressure rising. Each nation begins to look not inward, but sideways, toward its neighbors, its allies, its enemies. When the ultimatum finally arrives in Belgrade, Serbia reads it with disbelief. It demands total submission, the right for Austrian officials to operate on Serbian soil, to crush the nationalist movements by force. Serbia agrees to most of it, but hesitates on the point of sovereignty. That single hesitation is enough. Vienna calls it an insult. Berlin promises support. Russia vows to protect Serbia. France, bound to Russia, begins quiet mobilization. Britain, uncertain but wary, watches the lines forming. The fuse burns slowly at first, in telegrams, in silence, in the ticking of clocks. In these last days of July 1914, Europe is like a vast orchestra tuning before a storm. Each power listens to the other's notes, trying to tell whether they mean peace or war. Armies begin to mobilize, just in case. Reservists are recalled. Trains are quietly scheduled to move men and horses. Maps are unfolded in smoky rooms. Ordinary people sense something stirring. In Berlin, students sing patriotic songs late into the night. In Moscow, crowds gather under banners of the Tsar. In London, the newspapers shift tone, from curiosity to alarm. Yet still, many believe diplomacy will prevail. It always has before. But alliances are not built for compromise. They are built for chain reactions. Each promise of defense pulls another into motion. On July 28th, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. The river that flows through Vienna seems to grow colder. The emperor signs the order with a trembling hand. Within a week, Germany declares war on Russia. France mobilizes. Belgium's neutrality is guaranteed by Britain, and when German troops cross it, Britain joins too. The lights that had glowed over Europe's cafes and concert halls begin to go out, one by one. By early August, the entire continent is at war. On the night the declarations are made, people fill the streets. Crowds cheer beneath banners and torches, waving flags and singing hymns of glory. Few understand what they are celebrating. To many, it feels like an adventure, a chance to defend the homeland, to march with pride, to be part of something vast. Men volunteer by the thousands. Tailors run out of cloth for uniforms. Mothers weep quietly, proud and terrified at once. The newspapers speak of a short, decisive conflict. Soldiers are told they'll be home by Christmas. Young officers tuck photographs of sweethearts into their pockets and board trains that smell of steam and hope. But the trains do not return that winter, and the world that sends them off will not return at all. The fuse has burned down. The guns are waiting. The century is awake. Part 3, the March of Nations. The summer light fades slowly across Europe. In every capital, the news spreads like a tide. War has been declared. At first, it feels unreal, almost theatrical. Bands play in the squares. Crowds cheer as regiments march through the streets, their boots striking rhythm against the cobblestones. In Paris, the tricolor flutters from every window. In Berlin, young men sing anthems beneath the Brandenburg Gate. In London, church bells ring out over the Thames. For a brief, shimmering moment, war feels like a festival. The air is thick with speeches about honor, duty, and glory. Poets write verses promising victory and sacrifice. Women throw flowers from balconies. Boys not yet 18 lie about their age, desperate not to be left behind. Trains hiss with steam as soldiers wave from open carriages, smiling through clouds of confetti and cigarette smoke. No one yet understands what they are marching toward. The age of innocence has ended, though no one feels it. In drawing rooms and parliaments, generals unfold maps that still look clean, their edges sharp. They speak of sweeping maneuvers, decisive battles, campaigns measured in weeks, not years. Every nation believes it is ready. Every nation believes it will win. In Germany, the call to arms sweeps through the cities with frightening efficiency. Within days, millions are mobilized. Banners hang from buildings. Gott mit uns. God with us. Trains filled with soldiers snake through the countryside, their windows flashing in the sunlight. Mothers stand on platforms clutching handkerchiefs. Children wave flags until the smoke hides the train from view. In France, men gather beneath the Eiffel Tower, singing the Marseillaise. Old veterans of 1870 weep openly, remembering the humiliation of defeat by Prussia decades earlier. Now, they whisper, the nation will reclaim its pride. Fields of wheat are left half-harvested as men leave plows in the soil and take up rifles. Horses are requisitioned, church bells melted into artillery shells. The Republic has awakened. In Britain, the Declaration comes with solemn grace. Crowds fill Trafalgar Square, and the newsboys shout headlines into the night. Prime Minister Asquith speaks of duty, of defending Belgium, of standing by civilization itself. The Empire answers. From India, Australia, Canada, and South Africa, volunteers pledge themselves to a war that seems distant, noble, almost romantic. They board ships not yet knowing that the trenches of France will swallow them too. In Russia, the mobilization is vast, but clumsy. Peasants in coarse coats gather in village squares as priests bless them with holy water. They kiss icons and cross themselves before leaving home, unaware that the empire's old machinery cannot feed or arm them properly. Still, they go, singing songs of faith and Tsar, their voices echoing through endless plains. And in Austria-Hungary, the empire struggles to move as one. Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Croats, Poles, all bound under one crown, but divided in language and loyalty. In the cafes of Vienna, officers drink champagne, speaking of victory in Serbia. In the villages of Galicia, farmers are conscripted into armies that will soon vanish into the Carpathians. The old empire marches like an ancient creature, proud but already weary. The movement of men is like nothing the world has seen. Across the continent, the railways thrum day and night. Horses stamp and whinny in wooden cars. Cannons roll on flatbeds. The rhythm of locomotives becomes the heartbeat of the war. Every schedule, every timetable, every intersection of track is a weapon now, a line on a map that will carry millions to the front. But not all are soldiers. Alongside them travel medics, chaplains, nurses, and engineers. Telegraph poles rise across fields, carrying the voices of generals through humming wires. In stations, women hand out bread and coffee. Some press small gifts, a book, a photograph, a folded letter, into rough hands. They watch the trains disappear into the horizon, their eyes reflecting both pride and fear. Propaganda posters bloom on every wall. They show radiant soldiers, smiling and fearless. None show the mud, or the waiting, or the fear that will come. In London and Berlin alike, poets write of the beauty of sacrifice. They do not yet know that language itself will change, that the words honor and glory will one day taste like iron and ash. By late August, the armies of Europe are in motion. Germany moves west through Belgium, its columns stretching for miles, men, wagons, horses, and the first motorized convoys. Villages hear the distant rumble long before they see the dust. The invasion shocks the world. Britain declares war in response. In Belgium, civilians flee burning towns, their footsteps mingling with the sound of church bells silenced by fire. France mobilizes under the plan they call Sixteen, a grand offensive across Alsace and Lorraine. The soldiers wear bright red trousers, their officers still on horseback. They march into artillery and machine guns that no one had yet learned to fear. Whole regiments vanish in an afternoon. The first illusions die in the wheat fields. In the east, Russian forces move faster than expected, sweeping into East Prussia. Germany turns and meets them at Tannenberg, where railways and radio coordination deliver a crushing counterblow. Tens of thousands fall, many captured, more lost in the forests. It is the first sign that this war will not be fought by courage alone, but by industry, mathematics, and endurance. And yet, amid the confusion, hope still lingers. Soldiers write letters home about the beauty of dawn marches, about comradeship, about songs sung under stars. They still believe in a quick victory, in returning to the lives they left behind. In Paris, cafes are still open. In Berlin, theaters still perform. The sense of collapse has not yet arrived, only a strange exhilaration. But already, the shape of the new war is forming. The old world of gallant charges and cavalry banners is dying. Barbed wire glints in the fields. Machine guns dig in. The earth itself begins to change. Trenches appear like wounds, shallow at first, then deeper. The sound of artillery becomes the new heartbeat of Europe. The march of nations has ended at the edge of a pit, and as the first autumn leaves fall over France and Flanders, millions of men vanish into the mud, not yet realizing that they will live there for years. Part 4. Fire and Wire. The first autumn of the war settles over Europe like a slow-moving storm. The bright uniforms of August are already smeared with dust. The cheering crowds have faded from memory. Now the armies reach the borders of Belgium and France, and the land itself begins to change beneath their feet. What was meant to be a swift campaign becomes something heavier, slower, as if the earth refuses to let the men pass. Across Flanders, the fields are still green. Cows graze quietly along hedgerows. Cottages sit with their shutters open, unaware that the world around them is about to be torn open. The German columns advance in long, disciplined lines, their boots beating a steady drum across the roads. The French and British fall back, regrouping, digging where they can. What was once farmland becomes a maze of ditches, barricades, and splintered fences. Then the artillery begins. It starts as a distant murmur, like thunder rolling across a distant horizon. Then it grows. The sky shakes with it. The ground trembles. Great shells arc overhead, invisible until they burst, sending up plumes of earth, smoke, and wooden beams torn from shattered barns. Roof tiles fly like leaves. Trees snap like matchsticks. The world that had existed for generations vanishes in hours. The soldiers learn quickly. Artillery is the real master of this war. Not bravery, not even the rifle, but the long, slow breath of cannons speaking across miles. Men dig for survival. At first, the trenches are simple. Shallow pits scratched into the soil with shovels or even helmets. But each day, the guns return. Each night, men dig deeper. By October, the Western Front begins to harden like cooling iron. Day after day, the armies stretch out along a line that runs from the North Sea to the Swiss frontier, more than 600 kilometers of mud, smoke, and wire. A line drawn not on maps, but on human bodies and broken ground. No one planned this. No one wanted it. But the war's momentum has frozen. Each advance is met by machine gun fire. Each retreat by counterattack. The generals who once spoke of swift breakthroughs now study soil, drainage, and the placement of barbed wire. The first coils of razor wire appear along the front, glinting in the weak sun, stretched between wooden posts. They tangle around boots, snag uniforms, and slice hands. At night, soldiers hear it singing softly in the wind, like a cruel instrument tuned by the weather. They learn to fear that sound. Machine guns join the symphony. Their chatter is sharp, metallic, relentless. The weapon that once required a team becomes the cornerstone of defense. A single gun can stop hundreds. The fields where cavalry once rode now lie silent, the horses frightened by the smell of smoke and blood. The soldiers grow accustomed to strange things. The smell of damp earth mixed with cordite, the tremor of the ground, the taste of dust that settles on every tongue. They learn to sleep sitting up, rifles across their knees, boots half buried in mud. Letters home talk of a little discomfort, of a small delay, of a quick victory soon. They still believe it, but the land tells another story. Near Ypres, the battle of the frontiers turns the countryside into a blackened scar. Churches burn, windmills crumble. In the ruined streets, the echoes of voices linger long after the civilians have fled. Soldiers move through these ghost towns quietly, stepping over shattered glass and broken door frames. They carry rifles with bayonets fixed, long, thin blades that gleam in the twilight. Yet what they fear most is not the enemy they can see, but the artillery they cannot. Shells fall in patterns, short, long, left, right. They feel random, but they are not. Somewhere far behind the lines, an officer peers through rangefinders, adjusting angles with the cool precision of a mathematician. The shells answer his calculations. Each one carves another wound into the earth. By November, rain begins to fall, soft at first, then steady. Water pools in the newly dug trenches. Walls collapse. Boots sink. Men stand ankle deep, then knee deep, then waist deep in cold mud that clings to them like a living thing. They curse it, slap it, try to push it aside. But the mud is patient. It takes what it wants. The word stalemate appears in newspapers, but stalemate is too gentle a word. It suggests stillness, and there is nothing still here. At night, the front changes shape. The day's chaos gives way to darkness that feels almost holy. Lanterns glow faintly in dugouts. Somewhere far off, a cow moos, helplessly, lost or wounded. The smell of burnt straw hangs in the air. Men whisper as they repair their rifles, clean their boots, or pass around a tin of jam. Across the lines, the enemy is close, sometimes only 50 meters away. Voices carry in the dark, a cough, a laugh, a song hummed quietly. Two armies, each convinced of its righteousness, share the same cold wind. Runners make their way through the night, delivering orders from headquarters. They move fast, hunched low, avoiding the sky's silhouette. A flare rises suddenly, casting white light across the battlefield. Every shadow leaps into clarity. The twisted wire, the broken carts, the bodies that lie where they fell. The flare hovers for a moment, then fizzles. Darkness returns, even deeper than before. In the quiet moments, soldiers begin to understand that this war is unlike any they imagined. It is not movement, but endurance. Not glory, but waiting. Not triumph, but survival. And underneath everything, beneath the mud, beneath the roar of guns, there grows a feeling that this line of trenches is not temporary, that it will not vanish with the next offensive, that it is becoming a new kind of world, carved into the soil, a world of fire and wire, and Europe is sinking into it one slow night at a time. Part 5. The Front Line. Sleep's night settles slowly over the trenches, as if the darkness itself is exhausted. The last glow of the western sky fades behind a line of shattered trees, their branches stripped bare by months of shell fire. A thin mist drifts through no man's land, gathering over craters filled with rainwater. The front grows quiet, not silent, never silent, but quieter, like a great beast settling into uneasy sleep. The soldiers move carefully, speaking in low voices. Boots sink into mud that sucks at every step. Lanterns are covered with cloth to hide their glow from enemy eyes. The air smells of damp earth, burnt powder, sweat, and something metallic that never quite disappears. In this darkness, the men feel the weight of the earth pressing around them, as if the world above has closed its doors. This is the rhythm of trench life, a rhythm unknown to the world before this war. A soldier's day does not end with sundown. Instead, the front wakes in reverse. Men who spent the daylight pressed low against the parapets now rise to repair the lines. They stack new sandbags, replace wooden planks, and reinforce dugouts sagging from constant rain. Others carry rations from the rear. tins of bully beef, hard biscuits, a ladle of soup, lukewarm by the time it reaches them. The men eat quickly, sitting on ammunition boxes or boards laid across the mud. Somewhere nearby, a man sings softly, a lullaby from home, barely more than a whisper. Others hum along. In the flickering light, faces look older than they are, their features carved by sleeplessness and smoke. Letters are passed around, held tenderly like small treasures. A wife writes of a newborn child. A mother writes of a quiet garden. A school friend writes of university lectures and autumn leaves. These words become lifelines, linking the men to a world that suddenly feels impossibly distant. They write back when they can. Some take great care, leaning close to the page so that spilled mud or falling dust will not smudge the words. Others write quickly, their hands trembling from cold or nerves. They avoid describing what they see. Instead, they write of hope, of longing, of the small things that keep them human. A new song someone taught them, a warm drink offered by a comrade, the way the sun looked after days of rain. Then the letters are folded, and the guns begin again. Sleep in the trenches arrives in fragments. 10 minutes here, half an hour there. Never long enough, never deep enough. Men sleep sitting up, wrapped in their greatcoats, rifles within reach. They sleep with boots on, with helmets nearby, knowing that to remove anything is to tempt fate. Rats move across the floorboards, bold and unafraid. They gnaw at candles, bread, and sometimes more. The men learn to ignore them. Thunderstorms roll in, mixing with distant barrages until the sky and the guns sound like one voice. Water drips through cracks in the dugout ceiling. Some men tuck their blankets into the mud walls to stop the drafts. Others simply close their eyes and surrender to exhaustion. Every soldier learns the trench's sounds, the slow creak of wooden supports, the steady drip of water, the distant cough of a comrade, the rustle of pages as someone reads by dim light. It becomes a strange lullaby, unsettling yet familiar, comforting in a way only those who live there can understand. Sometimes a flare rises suddenly, casting everything in a ghostly white. Shadows leap across the trench walls. Men freeze, breath held tight, waiting to see whether the flare is followed by machine gun fire. If it isn't, they exhale quietly and return to their tasks. In those moments, the world feels suspended, a fragile balance between fear and stillness. As weeks turn into months, life in the trenches becomes its own kind of existence, separate from the world that continues beyond the front. Men begin to measure time by routines rather than dates. Stand to at dawn, rations at dusk, the officers' rounds, mail call, and the long hours of quiet punctuated by sudden violence. There is camaraderie here, deep, unbreakable, born from shared hunger, cold, and danger. A man will crawl through mud for someone he had never met weeks before, because that is what the trenches demand. They pass around cigarettes, share blankets, and trade stories. One tells a joke from home. Another describes a harvest festival. Another talks of a girl he hopes to marry. They cling to these fragments of normal life. In the dim light of a candle stub, one man might carve a piece of wood into a small figurine. Another might sketch the landscape. Broken trees, tattered fences, a sky full of smoke, trying to make sense of the chaos through lines on a page. Food arrives irregularly. Tea grows cold instantly in the winter air. Bread turns to paste when mixed with mud. Yet even these small meals become rituals. A tin of jam shared among 10 men can lift spirits more than any speech from headquarters. And always the watch continues. Soldiers take turns at the firing step, peering over the parapet through periscopes or small slots cut into the sandbags. Their breath forms small clouds. Their eyes sting from lack of sleep. Across the no man's land, the enemy is watching too, close enough that sometimes they hear footsteps, whispers, or the clang of a tin cup. Two armies, each waiting for the other to move, each longing for home, each trapped in a world carved out of mud. When dawn finally arrives, pale and weak, the front takes a deep breath. Stand to is called. Men climb to the firing step, rifles ready, eyes scanning the gray horizon. Sometimes nothing happens. Sometimes everything does. But most mornings, the war simply continues, quietly, steadily, as if it too has settled into the trenches. This is the front line asleep, restless, aching, alive with fear and fellowship, held together by mud, bread, and the fragile faith that someday the guns will stop. For now, the soldiers wait, they breathe, they endure, and as the sun rises over the broken fields of Flanders, the long night begins again. Part 6. Voices beneath the earth. Dawn fades into another pale, colorless day. The sky hangs low over the trenches, heavy with mist and the smell of churned earth. The surface world feels thin, fragile, a place of broken fences, collapsed barns, and barren trees that stand like ghosts against the horizon. But beneath this ruined land lies another world, hidden from the sky and carved by human hands. The tunnels, dugouts, and burrows where soldiers whisper their fears into the dark. The descent begins with a wooden ladder, its rungs slick with damp soil. One by one, men climb down, lanterns swaying softly in their hands. The air grows cooler, thicker. The sounds of the front, rifle cracks, distant artillery, the hiss of wind through wire, fade until they become a faint trembling above their heads. Down here, the earth speaks differently. The dugouts stretch like veins beneath the trenches. Some are small, barely enough space for 3 men to crouch beside a flickering candle. Others are large enough for an officer's table, a telephone line crackling with faint static, and a few wooden bunks built from scavenged planks. In French and British lines alike, these shelters are called abris, or dugouts. In German lines, Stollen. Whatever their name, they serve the same purpose, refuge from the endless rain of shells. The walls smell of wet clay, sweat, and the stale smoke of countless cigarettes. The floor is cold, the ceiling low enough that tall men must stoop. Candles and kerosene lamps glow like small stars in the darkness, their flames wavering with each draught of air. The soldiers breathe quietly, not wanting to disturb the silence, a silence that feels almost sacred. Voices drift through the tunnels, a man reciting a prayer in a trembling whisper, another murmuring the melody of an old folk song, someone laughing softly at a memory that feels a lifetime away. Every sound is swallowed by the earth and returned in muffled echoes. In the dim glow, men clean their rifles, mend socks, sharpen bayonets, or simply sit staring at nothing. Time behaves strangely here. Minutes stretch into hours. Day and night have no meaning. The only clock is the distant rumble of artillery. Beneath certain sectors, the war goes even deeper. Both sides employ tunnelers, miners, often from coal towns and ironworks, sent below ground to listen for enemy digging. These men move through the earth like shadows, carrying picks, shovels, and sacks to haul away the soil. They work by the faint glow of a candle, the flame trembling with every heartbeat. They listen, tap, tap, tap. Somewhere beyond the wall of earth, an enemy miner is digging too. The tunnelers press their ears against the soil, feeling the faint vibrations. Sometimes they hear voices, muffled, distorted, ghostly. When 2 tunnels grow too close, the work becomes a silent duel. Whoever reaches the other first may plant explosives. Whoever loses may vanish without a sound. Explosions underground are unlike any above. They do not roar. They thud, deep and final, shaking the ground like a heartbeat mist. Entire chambers collapse in on themselves. The earth swallows everything: timbers, lanterns, men. Survivors feel the tremor pass through their boots and know that someone, somewhere, has been buried alive. Yet the miners continue. They must. The war demands it. Above ground, the threat of gas adds to the soldiers' quiet dread. Chlorine, phosgene, and later mustard. Pale clouds rolling low across the fields, silent and deadly. Word spreads down the tunnels before it reaches the trenches. Men scramble for masks, or for the rags they soak in urine when masks are not available. In the confined space of a dugout, the fear of gas is a tight, cold thing that settles in the chest. Gas alarms ring out, gongs, horns, empty shell casings struck with metal rods. Each one echoes down the tunnels with a terrible clarity. Soldiers wake from shallow sleep, fumbling for masks, their hands shaking. The air becomes thick with panic until the alarm fades, and all that remains is the sound of men breathing heavily through rubber and cloth. Sometimes the alarms are false, sometimes they are not. Despite the danger, moments of humanity flicker underground. In one corner, a soldier kneels, writing a letter lit by a candle stub. His handwriting is careful, though his fingers tremble from cold. In another corner, two men share a tin of sardines, passing bites back and forth with a quiet laugh. Someone pulls out a harmonica, its soft notes weaving through the chamber like a fragile thread, tying them all to the world above. A chaplain visits, murmuring blessings. A medic checks on a man feverish with trench sickness. A sergeant tells a story from home, a tale of summer fields, warm bread, and a fishing stream that smells of pine and fresh water. The men close their eyes and breathe it in, letting the memory warm them for a moment. As the night deepens, the officers gather in one of the larger dugouts. Maps are laid across a crude wooden table. A lantern hangs above them, its light swaying gently. Lines are drawn, orders are whispered, patrols are arranged. The war continues in strategy as much as in blood, and the tunnels become the headquarters of decision-making. Outside, rain trickles through the cracks, forming small rivulets that run along the floor. The lantern flickers as if sighing. A mouse scurries across the ground. A candle burns low, wax pooling onto the dirt. A distant explosion sends dust drifting from the ceiling. The men tense for a moment, then return to their tasks with resigned calm. This is their world now, not the open fields of August, not the city streets they once walked, but the dim chambers beneath the earth where every breath feels shared with the soil. These tunnels hold the fears of a generation. They hold secrets, whispers, confessions. They hold men who have not seen the sun in days. But they also hold something else, a kind of quiet resilience, a stubborn ember of life burning beneath a landscape of ruin. In the darkness, where the enemy is sometimes only a shovel's length away, the soldiers find ways to endure. Their voices drift through the clay walls, soft, tired, human, voices beneath the earth. Part 7. Winter on the front. Winter arrives quietly at first. A thin frost settles over the parapets, turning wooden planks pale and stiff. The air sharpens, biting at fingertips and cheeks. Breath rises in small clouds, drifting into the dim morning like smoke from an invisible fire. The season that once meant warm kitchens, holiday candles, and the smell of pine now becomes another adversary. A silent one, relentless and intimate. Snow falls over the trenches in slow, patient flakes. It gathers on sandbags, softening their rough edges. It settles over broken wagons and shattered trees, covering the scars of battle with a thin white shroud. But the beauty is deceptive. Beneath that gentle surface lies cold that seeps into bone, mud that freezes into uneven ridges, and water that turns to ice along the trench walls. The world is hushed, yet harsher than ever. The men feel it immediately. Their coats grow stiff. Their boots, soaked from weeks of rain and mud, freeze hard as stone. To walk is to carry 2 blocks of ice strapped to their legs. Hands crack and bleed. Some rub oil into their skin. Others wrap cloth around their fingers until they resemble small, clumsy bundles. Frostbite blooms quietly, turning toes numb, then pale, then black. Still, the watches continue. A man stands at the firing step, peering through slits between sandbags, the cold gnawing at his face. He can see his breath rising in front of him like steam from a tired horse. Across no man's land, the enemy shapes are faint silhouettes hunched against the same wind. For a brief moment, the shared misery feels like a kind of connection, though no one would dare speak of it aloud. Winter changes the sounds of the front. The ground, once soft, now cracks underfoot. A rifle bolt echoes more sharply in the cold air. The distant boom of artillery seems to travel farther, rolling over the frozen land like thunder on a winter lake. Even the silence feels heavier. At night, the cold creeps deeper. Soldiers huddle together under blankets, their bodies making a fragile wall against the wind. Dugouts offer little warmth. Their walls drip with condensation, and the floorboards freeze. A few candles glow, their flames trembling in drafts. A man tries to light a cigarette, but finds his matches damp. Another rubs his hands together until the skin burns. Someone coughs, a deep scraping sound that echoes down the narrow corridors. The food grows colder too. Bread becomes hard as stone. Tea cools almost instantly. When rations arrive, if they arrive, men eat quickly, steam rising from their lips. They talk less now, their breath too precious to waste on conversation. Yet in this bitter season, small comforts become treasures. A pair of wool socks sent from home, a tin of cocoa shared among friends, a letter that smells faintly of perfume or pine. Men lean close to lanterns to read them, warming their hands over the flame before turning each page. The cold does not stop the fighting, but it slows it. The mud, now frozen, offers firmer ground. Artillery still falls, but the guns sometimes freeze, their mechanisms stiff with frost. The war continues in pulses, bursts of violence followed by long hours of waiting. Waiting, always waiting. By mid-December, something unspoken begins drifting through the trenches, a longing that grows stronger as the days shorten. Christmas is approaching. The word moves quietly from man to man, not with excitement, but with a strange, tender ache. It reminds them of home, warm kitchens, candlelit churches, evergreen branches hung over doorways. But the front is not home. It is a place of mud walls, iron, and fear. And yet, on Christmas Eve of 1914, something extraordinary happens. It begins with a song. On the German lines, a few men gather and lift their voices gently into the night air. Stille Nacht, heilige Nacht. The melody drifts across no man's land like smoke. The British listen, startled, unsure if it's a trick. Then, one by one, they begin to respond, singing their own carols in the language of their homeland. The two songs mingle over the frozen battlefield, weaving through the cold air as if the earth itself is listening. Soon, candles appear along the German parapet, small points of light glowing against the darkness. A British soldier peeks through a crack in the sandbags and sees silhouettes holding lanterns, not rifles. Someone calls out, "Merry Christmas!" A voice answers from the other side. There is hesitation, uncertainty. Then a few brave souls climb out of their trenches, hands raised. They walk slowly across the frost-covered ground. The enemy does the same. The two sides meet in the middle, in the land that had belonged to no one, and shake hands. They exchange cigarettes, chocolate, and buttons from their uniforms. Some show photographs of sweethearts or families. Others share jokes, their laughter rising softly into the night. A group finds a football somewhere behind the lines. They kick it back and forth, their boots clumsy in the frozen mud. For a brief moment, the battlefield becomes a playground. They bury the dead lying between the trenches, offering prayers in both languages. The air is still, the sky clear. For a few hours, the war seems impossibly far away. Christmas morning is cold and bright, the sun rising over a land touched by peace. But the truce is fragile, a brief miracle held together by frost and humanity. By evening, officers on both sides order their men back to their lines. The guns resume. The trenches close once more. Yet the memory lingers, warming the men in ways they cannot explain. As winter deepens, the front hardens as well. Snow becomes slush. Slush becomes mud. The trenches fill again, walls collapsing under the weight of freezing rain. The cold burrows into lungs and joints. But now the men carry with them the knowledge that even in this desolate world, for a single night, something gentle flickered through the darkness. They return to their routines. Sentry duty, repairs, rations, the constant struggle against the cold. But sometimes, on quiet evenings, a soldier hums a tune he heard from across no man's land. Another remembers the warmth of shaking a stranger's hand. And for a moment, the war feels a little less endless. Winter on the front is cruel. It tests the body, the spirit, the will. But it also reveals something small and stubborn, a spark of humanity that refuses to die, even when buried under snow, mud, and fear. The frost will melt, the trenches will deepen, and the war will continue. But that night, the night of songs and candles, remains like a soft ember in the heart of a frozen world. Part 8. The machines arrive. Spring returns to the front, but it does not bring renewal. The thaw only exposes what winter tried to hide: collapsed trenches, broken helmets half buried in mud, the twisted remnants of wire that glint like wet thorns under the pale sun. Birds return to the fields, circling uncertainly over landscapes that no longer resemble anything alive. The air grows warmer, but it carries a new scent now, a sharp, chemical edge that burns the nose and stings the eyes. Because this is the year when the war begins to change its shape. This is the year when machines arrive. At first, the soldiers notice small things: a different rumble in the sky, a faint hiss rolling across the fields, a strange metallic growl beyond the enemy's lines. None of these sounds belong to the natural world, and yet they begin to appear, day after day, like unwelcome guests on a once familiar stage. The first of the new terrors comes in April 1915 near Ypres. The men see a pale cloud drifting low across no man's land. Not smoke, not fog, but something heavier. Officers lift their binoculars, confused. The wind carries the cloud toward the Allied trenches. Birds drop from the sky. Leaves curl on branches. Then comes coughing, deep, desperate, wrenching. The men at the front clutch at their throats, their lungs filling with a burning, suffocating fire. It is chlorine gas, a weapon the world has never witnessed before. The cloud rolls into the trenches like a living thing. Men scramble for anything: scarves, shirts, towels, soaking them in water, tea, even urine, holding them over their mouths. But the gas finds its way in. It sears the eyes, turning vision to tears and blurred shapes. It scrapes the lungs raw. Many collapse, gasping for air that no longer exists. The survivors stumble back, coughing violently, their uniforms stained with vomit and earth. The horror spreads through the lines like a whisper. The enemy has brought a new kind of death. Gas masks appear soon after, heavy, awkward contraptions of rubber, canvas, and glass. Soldiers carry them everywhere, even when they sleep. They become part of a man's body, part of the war's new vocabulary. In the dugouts, the masks hang from hooks like empty faces, their glass eyes staring into the dark. And so, a new fear settles over the trenches, fear not of bullets or shells, but of the wind itself. But gas is only one of the machines entering the war. In the distant skies, aircraft begin to circle overhead, fragile contraptions of canvas and wood, held together by wires that tremble in the wind. At first, they are scouts, drifting above the front like oversized dragonflies, their engines sputtering and coughing. Pilots lean over the sides with cameras or notebooks, sketching the enemy's trenches from the air. The soldiers below look up and stare. Some wave, some fire rifles in frustration. But as months pass, the planes evolve. They are fitted with machine guns. Engines grow stronger. Wings grow broader. The sky becomes another front. Dogfights begin, swirling dances of death performed by men barely in their 20s. They wear leather helmets and goggles. Scarves trail behind them like bright threads in the wind. The roar of engines becomes familiar, a droning hum that soldiers recognize instantly. When a plane spirals downward, leaving a thin trail of smoke, men on both sides watch with a strange, sinking pity. Airmen, after all, live in a world apart, suspended between earth and heaven. At night, the threat grows stranger still. Zeppelins, massive airships filled with hydrogen, float across the sky like silent giants. Their shadows pass over villages and fields. From their gondolas hang bombs, dropped over towns that once believed themselves far from the war. Windows shatter, streets blacken, a new fear spreads, that no place, not even home, is safe anymore. On the ground, even heavier machines emerge. In 1916, near the Somme, British soldiers see something impossible rise above the horizon. A metal creature, slow but unstoppable, rumbling forward on caterpillar tracks that crush earth, fences, and debris beneath them. It groans like a wounded animal. Bullets bounce harmlessly off its steel sides. Mud clings to its hull in thick coats. The first tanks, they move awkwardly at first, stalling in craters, overheating in the sun. Many break down before reaching the enemy lines. But the idea is enough to unnerve the German troops. These machines represent something new. Mechanized warfare, a world where steel replaces flesh, where engines replace horses, where the battlefield becomes a factory floor. The era of knights and cavalry charges is gone. The era of machines has arrived, whether the men like it or not. The soldiers adapt, as they always do. They learn to recognize the sounds of approaching aircraft. They memorize the shape of gas shells. They train their ears to distinguish between the rumble of tanks and the thunder of artillery. New routines emerge: gas drills, aircraft warnings, anti-tank preparations. The war becomes colder, more efficient, less human, more mechanical. Yet even in this mechanized world, the men remain painfully human. A pilot writes a goodbye letter he hopes will never be sent. A tanker scratches the name of his fiancée into the steel wall beside his seat. A gas sentry keeps watch all night, listening for the hiss that means death is coming. A machine gunner cleans his weapon with trembling hands, knowing what it can do. The front transforms into a landscape where iron meets flesh, where engines roar beside whispered prayers, where invention outpaces understanding. The machines arrive, and with them comes a new truth of the war, that the very nature of killing has changed. The fields of Europe have become laboratories of destruction, and the men, whether in trenches, cockpits, or behind armor plates, must now navigate a world where humanity and machinery collide under the same gray sky. Part 9. Verdun, the endless hill. The year turns, and the war grows heavier. The trenches deepen, the guns grow louder, the machines grow deadlier, but nothing, not the gas, not the mud, not even the tanks, prepares the soldiers for what is coming in 1916. A place where the land itself seems cursed, where the air never clears, where time blurs into an endless roar. A place called Verdun. Winter lifts its veil slowly over northeastern France. Frost still clings to the ruined fields, but beneath it lies the raw, wounded earth. Craters within craters, trenches like veins carved into the soil, forests reduced to blackened stumps. The Meuse River winds quietly through the valley, indifferent to the armies gathering around it. And above the river rises a hill, not remarkable in shape, not impressive in height, yet destined to become the beating heart of a nation's suffering. Fortifications dot the landscape: Fort Douaumont, Fort Vaux, and a series of smaller strongpoints built decades before, when France feared invasion but never imagined a storm of such magnitude. The forts are old, their walls thick but tired, their stones chilled by years of neglect. Yet in February 1916, they become the center of an inferno. Germany has chosen Verdun for a reason. Their plan is not merely to capture territory, but to force France to bleed. General Falkenhayn describes it coldly. Verdun will be a place to bleed France white. A slow, crushing grind meant to break a nation's spirit. And so, before dawn, on February 21st, 1916, the guns begin. It starts with a single shot, then a second, then 1,000. In moments, the entire world becomes sound. German artillery, the most concentrated barrage yet seen in the war, rains down upon the French lines for hours, then days. The ground shakes continually, as though struck by an unending earthquake. The air disappears beneath the thunder. Trees splinter into dust. Villages vanish. The sky turns black with smoke and soil, rising in vast columns that block out the sun. Soldiers describe the bombardment as a storm from another century, a storm meant to unmake the world. Men are buried alive in collapsed trenches. Others lose their hearing, their minds rattled by the constant vibration. The French positions crumble, and still the shells fall. Some estimate more than 1 million shells in the first week alone. Then, through the smoke, the German infantry emerges. Verdun becomes a nightmare of movement and stillness. The Germans advance cautiously, climbing over shattered ground that no longer resembles earth. The French resist, stumbling from craters or from half-destroyed shelters, fighting with desperation and disbelief. Fort Douaumont falls quickly, taken by a small group of German soldiers who slip through a gap in its defenses. Its fall sends a shiver through the French high command. If Verdun collapses, Paris may be threatened. The nation braces itself. General Philippe Pétain is given the impossible task: hold Verdun at any cost. His orders spread like wildfire through the French ranks. Retreat is forbidden. Every man must stand and fight. The voie sacrée, the sacred road, becomes the lifeline of the French army, a single route carrying endless convoys of ammunition, food, guns, and exhausted men. Trucks rumble day and night, their engines choked with dust, their wheels grinding the road into mud and ash. Through this artery flows the lifeblood of France. Every week, divisions rotate through Verdun. Every week, thousands leave on stretchers, or not at all. Inside the forts, life becomes a different kind of torment. Fort Vaux, surrounded and battered by constant fire, turns into a stone coffin. French soldiers shelter in narrow corridors filled with smoke, sweat, and the smell of exploding masonry. They fight by candlelight, water running low, air growing stale. Their commander, Major Reynal, keeps a diary in trembling handwriting, recording pleas for help that cannot reach them in time. When German stormtroopers finally reach the fort's heart, the fighting becomes hand-to-hand. Darkness, bayonets, grenades rolling underfoot, men shouting, choking, stumbling. The fort falls after days of desperate resistance. The survivors are so parched they try to lick moisture from the cold stone walls. Above ground, the land has become unrecognizable. Nothing green remains. The once lush woods around Verdun are gone, reduced to a forest of shattered poles. Craters overlap like scales on a monstrous hide. The soil is churned into a gray-pink paste of mud, chalk, and blood. Artillery has sculpted the landscape into something alien, something obscene, something beyond nature. Soldiers describe the ground as boiling, constantly rising and falling under shell fire. Bones emerge from the earth. Bodies vanish into it. The dead cannot be buried. The living can barely survive. Despite the horror, amid the smoke and ruin, the French hold. They fight with a kind of quiet fury, not for glory, not for victory, but for the simple refusal to surrender the soul of their nation. Verdun becomes a symbol, a vow whispered in trenches and dugouts. Ils ne passeront pas. They shall not pass. Pétain's men repeat the words like a prayer. The Germans push harder. The French dig deeper. The hill remains contested for months. The battles of June, July, and August blur into one another. Rain turns the ground into sludge. Summer heat dries it into dust that clings to every pore. The smell of decay never leaves the air. Soldiers fight for meters of ground, losing thousands for each small gain. A village called Fleury changes hands 16 times. Today, nothing remains of it. By autumn, both armies are shadows of themselves. Men walk like sleepwalkers, hollow-eyed, boots worn to rags. Shell shock haunts many, tremors in the hands, stuttering speech, nightmares while awake. And still, the guns roar. In October, the French counterattack. Fresh artillery, new tactics, and relentless determination push the Germans back. By December, Verdun still stands. The French have held their ground. The German advance has failed. But victory is an illusion here. Both sides have lost nearly everything. Verdun leaves behind a landscape so scarred that even today it is called the Zone Rouge, the Red Zone, a place where the soil is poisoned and the bones of the fallen still lie beneath the moss. For the soldiers who lived through it, Verdun becomes more than a battle. It becomes a memory carved into their souls, a place where time stopped, where the world narrowed to fire, stone, and endurance, a place where survival felt like defiance, a place that would echo through the rest of the war, whispering of sacrifice far beyond what anyone believed possible. Verdun, the endless hill, the altar of a nation, the wound that never quite healed. Part 10. The Somme and the Sea of Mud. The year is 1916, and the war is already older than anyone ever imagined it could be. Verdun rages in the east, swallowing men in fire and despair. But far to the north, along a broad stretch of the Western Front, another storm begins to gather, one that will reshape the very meaning of war. This is the Somme, a place once known for its quiet rivers, gentle hills, and peaceful villages, a place about to become a monument of mud, steel, and loss. In the months leading up to the offensive, British and French engineers dig relentlessly. Trenches multiply like roots, stretching across the rolling fields. Artillery positions bloom behind the lines, long rows of cannons waiting silently under camouflage nets. Generals speak of breakthrough, of ending the stalemate, of pushing the German army back until the war finally cracks open. The men who will carry out these plans are young, many still barely out of school. Volunteers from towns and villages across Britain form the PALS battalions, units where brothers, cousins, neighbors, and co-workers stand side by side. They train together, they laugh together, they write home about the adventure ahead. They do not know how the Somme will change them. They do not know how many will never return. As July approaches, the men hear rumors of something unprecedented, an artillery bombardment so vast it will destroy the German lines entirely, making the enemy trenches little more than scattered earth. Officers repeat this claim with confidence. Soldiers cling to it like a promise. Then the bombardment begins. On June 24th, 1916, the sky opens. For 7 days and nights, the guns roar without pause. More than 1 million shells are fired. The ground shakes constantly, like a living thing trying to free itself from torment. The air fills with dust, smoke, and the low, unending growl of artillery. Villages miles away feel the tremors. Windows rattle in farmhouses. Birds flee the countryside. The soldiers huddle in their trenches, unable to hear anything but the thunder above them. Sleep becomes impossible. Conversation becomes shouting. The world turns into one continuous explosion. And yet, unknown to the British, much of the German line survives underground in deep bunkers carved from chalk. Their trenches shatter, but their men endure. They wait. The British do not know this. They believe the bombardment has cleared the way. And so, on the morning of July 1st, the order is given. Dawn breaks calm and pale. A soft mist lingers over the fields. The guns fall silent, an eerie, unnatural silence after a week of ceaseless noise. Soldiers rise from their trenches, rifles slung, packs heavy on their backs. Some wear the new steel helmets gleaming faintly in the early light. Others still carry the older soft caps. Officers check their watches. At 7:30 a.m., they go over the top. Lines of men climb ladders and step into no man's land, forming long, steady waves as they advance across the open fields. They walk, not run, burdened by gear, told that resistance will be minimal. Many carry footballs, encouraged to kick them forward as they cross. They talk quietly to steady their nerves. Some whisper prayers. Then the machine guns open. German gunners rise from their bunkers and set their weapons into place. They know exactly where to aim, at the gaps in the British wire, at the small rises in the ground, at the places where the advancing troops must cross. Their bullets cut through the morning like a scythe through wheat. In minutes, entire battalions fall. Men drop where they stand. Others crawl into craters, pressing themselves into the earth. Some stagger forward until more bullets find them. The officers try to shout orders, but their voices vanish beneath the thunder of the guns. Communications fail. Smoke thickens. Cries of pain rise over the fields, carried by the wind. By nightfall of July 1st, the British Army suffers nearly 60,000 casualties, the bloodiest day in its history. Whole communities back home will soon receive the same telegrams. The men who survive return to the trenches in silence, their faces gray with shock. They have seen things the world is not ready to understand. But the Somme does not end there. The battle continues for 141 days. Rain arrives, as if summoned by the suffering. Light drizzles turn to downpours. The chalky soil becomes thick mud, a mud that clings to boots, sucks at legs, and swallows entire mortars. Trenches collapse. The fields transform into a vast, churning sea of clay, water, and blood. Every step becomes a battle. Every small hill becomes a fortress. Every ruined farmhouse becomes a graveyard. The new British tanks appear again, 20 or so lumbering giants moving through the quagmire. Some break down immediately. Others advance a few hundred meters before becoming mired in deep mud. Men cheer when they see them, desperate for anything that might shift the tide. But the tanks are too few, too fragile, too early. Artillery continues constantly. The land fills with crater after crater until the ground resembles a vast, broken moon. Soldiers drown in the mud. Horses sink and cannot be pulled free. Stretcher bearers risk their lives to retrieve the wounded, moving slowly through a landscape that offers no cover. In the midst of this chaos, small things keep the men human. A tin of pudding found in a ration box, a letter that smells faintly of lavender, a cigarette shared under the shelter of a broken tree stump. Sometimes even a single dry patch of ground feels like salvation. By November, winter returns. Snow mixes with mud, forming a gray slush that freezes at night. The final attacks are made under skies that promise more cold. When the fighting finally ends on November 18th, the gains are measured in miles, not leagues. And at nearly 1 million casualties, the cost defies comprehension. The Somme becomes more than a battle. It becomes a symbol of courage, of sacrifice, of unimaginable waste, a place where hope drowned in mud, and where a generation learned that the world they knew was gone. For the men who fought there, the memory stays forever. The endless fields of shell holes, the thick smell of wet earth, the distant groan of artillery, the feeling of boots sinking deeper each day. The Somme is not a place they survived. It is a place they carried with them, long after the guns stopped. Part 11. Home front, distant front. Far from the trenches, the war casts its shadow across 1,000 quiet places. It stretches over kitchens lit by oil lamps, over factory floors that echo through the night, over distant colonies where men hear news of battles fought in countries they have never seen. The front is not only a line of mud and barbed wire. It is a web that touches every home, every field, every harbor, every heart. Life on the home front becomes its own kind of endurance. It is quieter, yes, but no less demanding. In Britain, Factories bloom like iron forests. Women fill jobs once held only by men. Munitions workers with yellowed skin from chemical exposure, tram conductors in heavy coats, nurses in crisp white aprons. Their hands grow calloused from turning shells. Their backs ache from lifting crates, yet they push on through days that feel endless. The clang of machinery becomes the new rhythm of the islands, the nights lit by furnaces that roar like distant artillery. Rationing begins slowly, sugar, meat, coal, but anxiety grows faster. Window panes shake when nearby factories test artillery rounds. Posters line the streets. Your country needs you. Eat less bread. Make do and mend. Mothers write letters for sons who can no longer hold a pen. Children collect scrap metal in baskets, eager to help without fully understanding why. The war is fought in whispers as much as in shouts. In France, the home front stands perilously close to the storm. Towns behind the lines live under constant rumble. Fields, once golden with wheat, now tremble with the vibration of artillery passing overhead. Villages host endless streams of wounded, men carried on stretchers, men hobbling on sticks, men sitting with blank eyes as nurses wash their wounds. Families live with the fear of occupation. Northern regions lie under German control. Letters cannot reach them. Families are split across the very soil they have farmed for generations. French women take the plows into the fields, turning earth hardened by shell shock. They harvest grain with hands that tremble from worry and exhaustion. Yet they endure, carrying France on their shoulders, while Verdun and the Somme consume the nation's sons. In Germany, the home front tightens like a belt pulled too sharply. The British naval blockade starves the empire. Coal is scarce, bread grows thin, and by 1917, people queue for hours in cold streets waiting for turnips, the bitter vegetable that becomes a symbol of the hunger gripping the country. Factories hum night and day. Women, elderly men, and children take jobs in steelworks and munitions plants. Newspapers speak of victory. Kitchens speak of empty cupboards. Families light fewer lamps to save oil. They tear old clothes into strips for bandages. They knit wool socks for soldiers freezing in the east. Even music halls and theaters perform for war relief, though the laughter sounds strained. Through it all, people whisper of the casualties, the missing, the wounded, the thousands who will never return. But the home front extends far beyond Europe. Across the vast British Empire, the war reaches into sunlit landscapes thousands of miles from the Western Front. In India, young men enlist in hopes of adventure, honor, or a path to respect under British rule. They travel from the heat of the Punjab to the cold fields of Flanders, wearing turbans beneath steel helmets, their breath turning to mist for the first time in their lives. In Australia and New Zealand, volunteers cross oceans to fight at Gallipoli. Their letters home smell of salt and fear. Mothers read them beneath warm, southern skies, trying to imagine the distant cliffs and trenches where their sons now live, and too often die. In Africa, porters carry supplies across mountains and jungles, far from the headlines that document Europe's battles. They march in silence, their footsteps a quiet contribution rarely acknowledged, yet essential to the war's machinery. In Canada, lumberjacks cut vast forests to provide timber for trenches, rails, and ships. Farmers grow wheat by the ton, feeding soldiers they will never meet. Entire towns are reshaped by the war effort, as docks fill with ships and factories pulse with new life. And in the Ottoman Empire, the war draws men from deserts, mountains, and ancient cities, from Syria, Anatolia, Iraq, and Palestine, to distant fronts where modern weapons meet ancient landscapes. The distant front is not only geographic, it is emotional. On every continent, families gather around radios or newspapers, waiting for news. A single name printed in black ink can silence a room for days. A letter arriving late can break a mother's heart. A photograph of a smiling soldier grows creased from being held too often. The war creates a silence that lives inside people, a constant, low ache that tightens whenever a knock sounds at the door. Some homes remain filled with hope, others with fear, many with both. Daily life becomes a strange mixture of routine and dread. Bread is baked, children play in the streets, church bells ring on Sundays. But under everything lies the weight of a world that feels tilted, unstable, stretched. Every family counts the days since their son wrote. Every village posts casualty lists in the town square. Every nation asks its people to give more, endure more, hope more. Factories shake the ground. Shipyards clang like anvils of thunder. Fields grow thin from overwork. The home front carries scars that are quieter than those at the front, but just as deep. And so the war stretches its reach across continents, across oceans, into living rooms and workshops and markets. The sound of artillery may be far away, but its echo touches everyone. The front may be distant, but no one is truly far from it. Part 12. The sky turns to iron dawn, breaks over the ruined fields in a pale wash of gray. The air is still, cold enough that each breath hangs for a moment before dissolving into the light. Soldiers climb to the firing step, scanning the horizon the same way they have for months. But today, their eyes drift upward, because now the sky is no longer only sky. It is a battlefield, silent at times, roaring at others, a place where men drift, dive, and disappear. The war has expanded into a new dimension, and everything above the trenches carries a strange, electric tension. What once belonged to clouds and birds now belongs to engines and wings. The sky has turned to iron. In the earliest months of the war, aircraft were little more than fragile skeletons of wood and canvas. Their engines coughed and sputtered. Pilots sat exposed to wind and rain, scarves whipping behind them, goggles fogging in the cold. They carried cameras, not guns. They sketched trenches from the air. Their purpose was to watch, not to kill. But the war has a way of transforming everything it touches. Rifles are strapped to fuselages. Pistols are carried in cockpits. Mechanics tinker with mounts and pulleys until the first synchronized guns appear, weapons that fire through the turning propeller without shattering it. The moment that invention arrives, the sky changes forever. Now the planes hunt each other. For soldiers on the ground, the sound of an approaching aircraft becomes unmistakable. A rising hum, then a growling roar, then the sharp buzz as the plane cuts across the wind. Men look up instinctively, shielding their eyes from the sun. They see specks growing larger, wings glinting, engines vibrating with mechanical fury. Sometimes it is one plane, sometimes dozens, and sometimes the most dreaded sight, a vast, heavy shadow drifting above the clouds, zeppelins, silent whales of hydrogen and canvas floating across the night sky. These great airships move slowly but confidently, venturing far behind the lines to drop bombs on towns that once believed themselves safe. Their engines drone like distant thunder. From below, they appear almost serene, glowing faintly from within, gliding like ghosts. But where they pass, fire follows. Streets burn, windows shatter. Civilians wake to the sound of explosions in the dark. For the first time in history, war has learned to fly. Up above the trenches, the air fills with jewels that look almost beautiful from afar. Two planes spiral around each other in tight circles, climbing, diving, twisting, their wings catching the light as they chase one another through the clouds. Then a flash of tracer rounds, a curl of smoke, a sudden drop. A man falls from the sky. Sometimes his plane tumbles like a leaf caught in a storm. Sometimes it spirals gracefully, engine silent. Sometimes the pilot leaps out, without a parachute, because none are provided. Soldiers on the ground watch him fall with a silence that feels like prayer. In the air war, death comes quickly, but the moments before it can be strangely peaceful. Pilots often describe a sense of detachment, as if the world below them is part of another life. They see the trenches as thin scars across the earth. They see towns reduced to ruins. They see the curvature of the horizon in the early morning light. They fly above the mud, above the wire, above the gas. For brief moments, they are free. But freedom in this war never lasts. Airfields behind the lines become hives of activity. Mechanics work with blackened hands, tightening bolts, checking fuel lines, patching holes with fresh canvas. The smell of oil mixes with that of damp earth. Pilots pace in their heavy boots, smoking cigarettes with shaking fingers. Some are barely 20. Some carry lucky charms, a ribbon, a coin, a photograph. Some write farewell letters before every flight. They climb into their cockpits with a calm that surprises even themselves. Engines sputter, then roar. Propellers spin into blurs. The ground trembles as planes take off, wings wobbling slightly until they catch the wind. From the trenches, men watch them rise. A few wave, a few whisper, "Good luck." Others look away, knowing how many do not return. Bombing runs become part of the new rhythm of war. Small planes carry clusters of explosives strapped beneath their wings. They fly low over enemy lines, engines screaming, bullets whipping past them from ground guns. They release their bombs and pull up just in time, or not in time at all. The bombs fall with a soft whistling sound. Then the earth erupts. The front is reshaped not only from below now, but from above. Night operations begin. Pilots fly by moonlight, navigating by the faint glimmer of rivers and roads. The darkness is absolute, broken only by the glow of burning villages or the sparks of gunfire. Many planes vanish into the night, swallowed by cloud or mechanical failure. Still, the missions continue. There is no quiet in the sky anymore. On the ground, soldiers learn new instincts. They crouch when they hear the drone of an engine. They scatter when bombs fall. They fire rifles upward in frustration. They curse the machines that haunt their days and nights. But they cannot stop looking at them, for in this mechanized war, the planes carry a strange fascination. They are elegant compared to the mud and wire. They are swift compared to the slow grind of trench life. They shimmer in the sun, tiny and fragile against the endless sky. They are symbols of a world changing too fast for anyone to understand. The sky that once promised hope now holds fear. The clouds that once brought rain now carry death. The sunrises that once lit quiet fields now reveal smoke rising from the ruins of villages. The heavens have become another front, one where the earth's oldest dream, the dream of flight, has been twisted into something unrecognizable. The sky turns to iron, and the war rises with it. Part 13. The ocean war, far from the trenches, beyond the reach of artillery and the shadow of aircraft, the war takes on another shape. A quieter, colder, more patient form. It moves with the tides, hides in the deep, and slips through fog banks like a whisper. It is fought not over muddy fields, but across vast stretches of grey water, where the wind tastes of salt and iron. This is the ocean war, a front without trenches, where silence is as deadly as gunfire, and where a ship's wake may be the last trace it ever leaves behind. The North Sea lies cold beneath a low sky. Waves roll in steady, rhythmic swells, slapping against the hulls of destroyers and merchant ships. In the early years of the war, the sea seems predictable: storms, fog, and the usual dangers of navigation. But slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the waters begin to change. Rumors spread through the harbors, ships disappearing without distress calls, cargo vessels vanishing mid-voyage, lifeboats found empty or never found at all. The sailors speak of a new terror, one that cannot be seen until it is too late. German U-boats, long steel cylinders gliding beneath the waves, become the most feared predators in the world's oceans. They move with ghost-like stealth, their engines humming softly as they patrol the shipping lanes. A periscope rises, silent and thin, just above the water's surface. A captain peers through it, breath fogging the glass as he checks bearings. Then the torpedo is launched. It leaves the tube with a soft hiss, hardly more than a sigh, before racing through the water toward an unsuspecting ship. Moments later, the ocean erupts in a column of spray and flame. Wood splinters, metal bends, men cry out in confusion and terror. Within minutes, ships that took months to build and crews who have sailed for decades vanish beneath the waves. The ocean becomes a graveyard without markers. On the British side, the naval blockade tightens like a noose. The Royal Navy dominates the surface, controlling shipping routes and cutting Germany off from distant supplies. German ports feel the pressure. Warehouses grow emptier. Families struggle to find bread, potatoes, even coal. Hunger shadows the empire. The blockade is not loud like artillery. It does not roar or crack, but its silence kills just as surely. And so Germany turns fully to the U-boat, its silent answer to Britain's vast, sprawling navy. U-boat crews live in cramped steel tubes that smell of diesel, sweat, oil, and dampness. Their world is narrow, metallic, and vibrating with the thrum of engines. They sleep in shifts, curled in narrow bunks, the walls sweating with condensation. When submerged, the air turns stale. Every breath feels rationed. Yet these men endure. They navigate in darkness, listening to sonar pings and the distant thuds of depth charges. They surface at night to recharge batteries, the stars reflected on the black water like shards of cold light. They move swiftly, silently, returning to the deep before dawn. It is a strange existence, part hunter, part hunted. The merchant sailors who face them live under constant threat. They sail through fog, through storm, through calm water that looks harmless but hides danger. Every creak of wood, every splash against the hull, every flicker of lantern light could mean the end. When a ship is hit, the chaos is immediate. Men scramble for lifeboats. Smoke pours from the hold. The deck tilts sharply, pitching crates and bodies alike. Chilled seawater rushes in. Some escape, many do not. Survivors cling to debris, waiting for rescue that may not come. They speak of the eerie quiet after a sinking, a moment when the sea seems to swallow all sound, leaving only the wind and the soft, indifferent slap of water against floating wreckage. As the war drags on, the ocean becomes a battlefield of strategy and starvation. In Germany, food grows scarce. Bread rations shrink. Families boil turnips until their kitchens smell of earth and bitterness. Coal shortages leave homes cold through the winter. The blockade tightens and the hunger sharpens. German leaders believe only one thing can break Britain's grip: unrestricted submarine warfare. Every ship, merchant, neutral, passenger, is declared a target. In 1915, the ocean war shocks the world when the U-boat U-20 sinks the RMS Lusitania. Nearly 1,200 civilians die, including women and children. Newspapers print the names with heavy black ink. The world recoils. Protests erupt from New York to London. Yet the war at sea continues, more ruthless than before. By 1917, the U-boats sink hundreds of thousands of tons of shipping each month. Britain's food stocks shrink to weeks. Panic spreads. The government urges civilians to plant gardens, save scraps, and avoid waste. Posters appear. Eat less wheat. Save the ships. Victory begins in the kitchen. Bread becomes precious. Sugar becomes a luxury. The line between hunger and hope grows thin. But the U-boat's success brings new consequences. Across the Atlantic, America, once determined to stay neutral, watches the sinking of its ships with growing outrage. The loss of the Lusitania lingers in public memory. Merchant vessels flying the stars and stripes begin disappearing into the cold North Atlantic. And in Washington, patience wears thin. The ocean war, slow, silent, merciless, pushes the United States closer to the conflict it once sought to avoid. Meanwhile, on the surface, Another threat emerges: mines, invisible, floating just beneath the waves, tethered by chains or drifting freely. Ships strike them without warning, a hollow boom, a flash. Then the sea claims another victim. Mines do not sleep, they do not negotiate, they wait. The naval war becomes a labyrinth of hazards. Destroyers zigzag across the waves, searching for periscopes. Convoys form, long lines of merchant ships protected by escort vessels. Depth charges explode like underwater thunderstorms. The ocean becomes a place of echoes, shadows, and dread. Yet life at sea holds moments of strange beauty. Sunsets that paint the sky in gold, whales surfacing alongside convoys, nights so clear the heavens seem close enough to touch, sailors gathering on deck to breathe fresh air, watching phosphorescent waves sparkle under the moon. But beneath that beauty lies the knowledge that the sea carries death now, silent, patient, and everywhere. The ocean war is the war's coldest front. A place where men vanish without a trace. A place where hunger becomes a weapon and silence becomes a killer. And as the conflict deepens, the tides continue their quiet, indifferent rhythm, rising, falling, erasing the footprints of ships that no longer exist. Part 14. The Year of Exhaustion, 1917. By the first pale mornings of 1917, the war feels unbearably old, as though it has seeped into the very bones of Europe, into its soaked fields and ruined forests, into the trembling factories that work without pause, into the quiet corners of kitchens where families count the days between ration deliveries. Nothing feels untouched anymore. The soldiers sense this age most deeply. They feel it in the stiffness of their joints, in the rasp of their breathing after years of cold air and damp trench walls, and in the heaviness behind their eyes when they try to imagine a life beyond the front. Civilians feel it too, through empty cupboards, endless queues, and the silent grief that spreads through every street. This is the year when the war stops expanding, not because peace is near, but because everything, land, armies, nations, spirits, is stretched to its limit. The war no longer surges, it strains, it creaks, and it begins to crack the world that carries it. Winter releases the trenches reluctantly. Frost melts into long, sucking ribbons of mud that drag at men's boots until every step feels like lifting stone. Water gathers in dugouts, soaking blankets that will not dry. Soldiers cough through nights that echo with the wet scrape of sickness. Letters arrive slowly, sometimes weeks late, blurring what little sense of time remains. The ground between the armies looks almost familiar now. Every torn ridge, every shattered tree stump, every line of collapsed earth, because the same men have stared at them through 3 long years of stalemate. Despite this exhaustion, officers still plan new offensives. Paper maps are spread across tables, lines are drawn, promises are made. But the soldiers listening to these promises feel something deep within them resisting, an exhaustion not of the body alone, but of the spirit, a tiredness colder than winter and heavier than hunger. They have passed through Verdun, survived the Somme, crouched beneath the gas clouds at Ypres, and fought in the drowning mud of Flanders. They have seen friends vanish in the blink of an explosion. They have learned that courage can exist alongside despair. And now, when orders for fresh assaults appear, that inner resistance grows stronger. Nowhere does this resistance break the surface more clearly than in France. General Robert Nivelle promises a grand, decisive offensive, swift, brilliant, victorious within 2 days. Newspapers carry his confidence eagerly, politicians cling to it. But the men who have lived inside these trenches for years know that no stroke of genius can erase the raw truth of this war. When the attack begins in April At the Chemin des Dames, the illusion shatters instantly. French soldiers advance into volleys of machine gun fire that mow them down in moments. The ground, ripped apart by craters, makes movement slow and desperate. German defenses, layered and prepared, unleash a storm no optimism can soften. Thousands fall for mere meters of gain. Nivelle's dream dissolves almost as soon as it begins. In the days that follow, the impossible happens. French soldiers refuse not with rebellion or chaos, but with a quiet, aching defiance. They promise to defend their homeland. They promise not to retreat. But they cannot, they will not, launch another hopeless charge into the teeth of annihilation. Some sit in trenches and sing instead of advancing. Others shoulder their rifles and walk calmly toward the rear, repeating the same word until it becomes a chant. Enough. They ask not for revolution. They ask for leave, rest, bread, dignity. The mutinies ripple through dozens of divisions, frightening the government, filling military courts, and finally forcing change. Pétain arrives, steady and measured, and offers what the men truly need: rotation, better rations, time to breathe. Slowly, cautiously, the French army steadies itself again, deeply wounded but not broken. Far to the east, another rupture tears through the war. Russia is collapsing under the weight of hunger, cold, and unimaginable casualties. Cities starve, farmers have no seed, soldiers march without boots or ammunition. The Tsar remains distant, almost spectral, as the empire beneath him disintegrates. In Petrograd, protests swell into crowds, crowds into movements, movements into revolution. When the Tsar abdicates in March, the shock ripples through Europe like a cold wind. A provisional government forms, but it insists on continuing the war, a decision that soldiers at the front, starving, freezing, and abandoned, cannot understand. Desertions surge. Entire units evaporate into the countryside. Weapons disappear into barns and forests. The army becomes a shadow of itself. Then autumn brings a second revolution, sharper, more organized, more relentless. The Bolsheviks rise with 3 words that speak directly to the suffering millions: peace, bread, land. Russia steps out of the war with a sudden, jarring silence. The Eastern Front falls still, and the German army turns westward, releasing divisions the Allies had once hoped would remain pinned forever. The balance tilts. The world shifts again. Back on the Western Front, 1917 grows heavy with strangeness. Britain strains under the pressure of years of fighting. Rations grow thinner, queues grow longer, factories glow through the night. The seas around the islands churn with danger as U-boats sink ship after ship. In Flanders, the British attack at Passchendaele, only to find themselves trapped in weeks of rain so merciless it turns the battlefield into a drowning morass, where men and horses sink beneath the mud, as if the earth itself cannot bear their weight. Victories, when they come, feel hollow. Small triumphs bought with mountains of suffering. And yet, across the ocean, a new force stirs. American anger has grown with every ship sunk, every life lost to the deep. The question of neutrality begins to crumble. When the United States declares war in April 1917, it does not immediately transform the battlefield, but something vital shifts in the collective spirit of the Allies. Fresh uniforms begin to appear in port cities. New supplies cross the Atlantic. A sense of future strength, of energy not yet depleted, moves quietly through the ranks. The Central Powers feel the shadow behind them grow darker. The Allies breathe, for the first time in months, a little deeper. By the end of the year, Europe stands like a tired figure, swaying under a burden too long carried. France has survived mutiny. Russia has retreated into revolution. Germany starves behind the blockade. Britain bleeds into the mud of Flanders. America gathers strength across the sea. Everywhere, from trenches to factories, from kitchens to command rooms, The same whispered question hangs in the cold air. How much longer can this continue? The war does not end in 1917, but something deep beneath it cracks. This is the year when armies falter, when empires shake, when hope survives only as a faint ember carried through the dark. A year of exhaustion, a year of reckoning, a year that leads, painfully and inevitably, toward the final storm. Part 15, The New World. Wakes winter fades again, and with it comes a faint but unmistakable shift, a change in the rhythm of the war, as if a new wind has begun to blow across the battered plains of Europe. The armies on the Western Front still face each other amid mud, wire, and ruin, but something moves beyond the horizon now, something distant, enormous, and full of energy. A new world is waking. The United States, long reluctant, long watching from afar, now steps onto the stage with a quiet determination that will alter the balance of everything. In the spring of 1917, the first American soldiers arrive in Europe. They disembark at French ports under gray skies, greeted by crowds who cheer with tears in their eyes. The men wear fresh khaki uniforms, their boots unscuffed, their faces unlined by trench fatigue. Many are young, too young to understand the scale of the war they have entered, too young to fear what lies ahead. They march with an easy confidence. Their steps are lighter, their voices louder, their posture straighter. Newspapers call them doughboys, though no one agrees exactly why. Perhaps the dust of training grounds, perhaps a nickname from older wars. Whatever the reason, the name sticks, attached to thousands of men whose presence brings a strange, almost foreign hope. American soldiers carry baseball gloves in their packs, chewing gum, photographs from home that show wide streets, tall buildings, and sunlit porches. They speak with accents that sound exotic to French farmers and British officers alike. Some drink coffee from tin cups as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Some marvel at the old stones of European villages. Some stare silently at the ruins left by years of bombardment. They have entered a world that feels ancient, damaged, and worn, a world they did not expect. Behind them rises an empire of support, ships crossing the Atlantic in long convoys guarded by destroyers, factories booming day and night in New York and Chicago, fields of wheat stretching endlessly across the Midwest. A nation of millions newly mobilized for war. America's entrance brings resources the Allies desperately need: steel, coal, food, engines, explosives, trucks, ambulances, uniform cloth, and above all, fresh manpower. An entire generation that has not yet been hollowed by trench life. But it also brings something intangible: momentum. A sense that the war might someday, somehow, end. The soldiers on the Western Front feel the difference immediately. Letters home describe it. Journal entries whisper it. Officers speak of it with cautious optimism. Civilians cling to it like a lifeline. Yet America's arrival does not magically ease the suffering. Training camps along the French countryside fill with recruits learning the grim realities of trench warfare. They practice on obstacle courses lined with barbed wire. They crawl through mud under machine gun fire. They learn gas drills. They rehearse bayonet charges. Their instructors, veterans of Verdun, the Somme, and Ypres, watch them with a mixture of hope and sorrow. Learn fast, they say. There is no room for mistakes here. You will see things you'll never forget. The doughboys listen, but the scale of the war remains beyond their imagination. Meanwhile, the German High Command watches America's growing presence with dread. They know that once hundreds of thousands of Americans enter the line, the balance will tip beyond repair. Time becomes the enemy. Germany must strike before American strength fully blooms. Thus, in 1918, the German generals prepare their final gamble. The spring offensive, or Käseschlacht, a massive strike meant to shatter the Allies before America's weight can settle onto the scales. But before the storm, there is calm, a brief, strange lull where both sides gather strength. And in that lull, the American presence grows. On village roads, long columns of American troops march past French civilians who offer them bread, wine, apples, flowers, anything they can spare. Children wave flags stitched hurriedly from scraps of cloth. An old woman touches the sleeve of a passing American and murmurs, "Merci, merci," as if the word itself is a prayer. The doughboys smile, awkward and kind. They say, "Bonjour," in accents that make the children laugh. They tip their helmets to women hanging laundry out of cellar windows. They pet farm dogs who haven't barked in months. Their presence feels like spring light after a long winter. In cafes behind the lines, French soldiers and American soldiers sit together. They share cigarettes. They trade slang. They compare rations. They talk of dusty baseball fields, of Mississippi rivers, of wheat that grows taller than a man. The French soldiers listen with quiet wonder, imagining landscapes untouched by artillery. For a moment, the war feels less suffocating, but not all is smooth. The American commanders insist on fighting independently, under their own flag, not as replacements folded into French or British divisions. They believe it will preserve morale and identity. And perhaps they are right, but it means that many American units face the front untested. Some British officers grumble that the Americans are inexperienced. Some French officers worry the Americans are too bold, too confident. Many American soldiers, seeing the trenches for the first time, feel the shock deep in their bones. Yet when the Germans launched their great offensive in 1918, these doubts begin to fade. The doughboys stand their ground at Cantigny, their first major battle. They hold firm near the Marne, reinforcing French units in desperate need. And at Belleau Wood, they fight with a ferocity that shocks even the enemy. Retreat? One Marine officer reportedly says, "Retreat? Hell, we just got here." The battle becomes legend, but the cost is steep. The forest becomes a tangle of shattered trunks and torn uniforms, the ground soaked by rain and blood. The Americans learn, quickly, painfully, what the war truly is. Yet through victory and loss, through inexperience and bravery, the American presence grows stronger. By the summer of 1918, over 1 million American soldiers stand in Europe, with more arriving each week. Factories in the United States roar like thunder. Shipyards glow red with molten iron. Train yards clatter night and day. America has awakened fully, not as an observer, but as a force reshaping the destiny of the war. The Allies feel the shift. The Germans feel the pressure. And the world senses that the balance, after years of stalemate, is beginning to turn. The front has not yet broken. The guns have not yet fallen silent. But the horizon has changed. A new wind sweeps across the trenches, carrying with it the sound of engines, the rhythm of marching feet, and a distant, growing promise that this war, someday soon, might finally end. Part 16, The 100 Days of Thunder, Spring 1918, enters France with a deceptive softness, a thin and fragile brightness that almost suggests a return to ordinary seasons after the long, sodden winter. The fields thaw, rivers swell with melted snow, and the air carries the scent of damp grass and earth beginning to loosen. For a brief moment, the land feels as though it is remembering how to breathe again. Yet, beneath this surface of renewal, the armies are preparing for something immense. One final upheaval that Germany, starved and desperate, believes may be its last chance to break the stalemate before America's growing presence transforms the balance irreversibly. This last gamble arrives on March 21st, 1918, when the German High Command unleashes an offensive of a scale unmatched since the first year of the war. Dawn breaks under a heavy fog that clings to the trenches near the Somme, reducing visibility to a few paces, and in that gray murk, the German artillery begins a bombardment so dense, so precise, and so relentless that even Verdun seems almost quiet by comparison. The ground shakes in continuous waves. Messages stumble through the lines in fragments, and exhausted British units suddenly find themselves pressed back by fast-moving assault troops trained to slip through weak points and create chaos deep behind the front. Villages change hands in hours, roads fill with retreating soldiers, and entire sectors begin to fold under the weight of the attack, creating a brief and dangerous sense that Germany might, at last, break through. But the offensive also carries within it the seeds of its own exhaustion. The Germans advance so rapidly that their supplies lag miles behind. Horses collapse, troops already weakened by long months of hunger, slow to scavenge captured Allied stores, and the more deeply they push into land destroyed earlier in the war, the more the terrain chokes the momentum they fight so hard to build. The danger remains real, and Paris feels the vibration of distant guns, prompting quiet evacuation plans while refugees flee southward in carts and on foot. Yet into this trembling gap comes a force the war has not seen before. Fresh American troops, still unbroken by years of trench life, stepping forward with a determination that alters the tone of the entire front. The American arrival does not immediately transform the battlefield, but at Cantigny they seize their first objective and hold it under counterattack, a small victory that carries immense symbolic weight. Soon after, as the German push bends toward the Marne, the river that had once saved France, American units are thrown into the line at places like Château-Thierry and Belleau Wood. Their fighting is harsh, close, and costly, carried out in wheat fields torn by machine gun fire and in forests darkened by smoke and splintered wood. But their resolve does not fracture, and the German advance meets a new and unforgiving resistance. By midsummer, the great offensive begins to falter. German lines stretch thin, their artillery weakens, their reserves fade, and the physical and emotional exhaustion of 4 years settles heavily over an army that once marched confidently through Belgium. It is in this moment, when Germany's strength begins to bow under its own weight, that the Allies see their opportunity. What follows is not a single battle, but a sustained, coordinated series of attacks known as the 100 Days Offensive. Beginning in early August near Amiens, French tanks, British artillery, and American infantry advance with a rhythm far more unified than in any earlier phase of the war. Deception tactics mask their movements. Aircraft dart low through the mist, catching German positions unprepared. The shock of this renewed strength breaks sections of the German line almost immediately, prompting General Ludendorff to call August 8th the Black Day of the German Army, a phrase that captures not only the tactical loss, but the psychological collapse spreading through his ranks. From that point onward, the front moves steadily, a rare thing after years of stalemate. Montdidier, the Scarpe, the once imposing Hindenburg line, the thick forests of the Meuse-Argonne, each becomes another step in the long, grinding advance. American troops face some of the war's most difficult terrain in the Meuse-Argonne, pushing through ravines filled with mist and ridges weighted with machine gun fire. Their progress slow and costly, but unwavering. Across the entire front, the Germans fall back mile by mile from trenches they spent years fortifying, from ridges that once seemed immovable, from villages built and destroyed so many times that their names barely resemble places anymore. The Allies who advance now are not the same armies that drowned in the mud of Passchendaele or bled on the slopes of the Somme. They are reinforced, re-equipped, re-coordinated, and buoyed by American manpower and material. Tanks roll with fewer breakdowns, aircraft provide cover more reliably, and artillery maps the terrain with a precision unimaginable a few years earlier. Germany, by contrast, is weakening on every front, not only on the battlefield, but at home, where hunger deepens, strikes spread, and whispers of revolution drift through shipyards and factories. Newspapers that once spoke of victory now question the very foundations of the state. Soldiers at the front sense this change as surely as the civilians behind them. Morale fractures. Units surrender together. Officers struggle to maintain order. The once confident army that strode into Belgium in 1914 now moves through ruins with the exhausted posture of a force that understands its own defeat. By autumn, the truth becomes impossible to hide. Germany cannot continue. Its lines crumble, its people starve, its government begins to unravel. The war has reached its final turning point. The 100 Days of Thunder is not remembered as a single battle, but as a long, relentless realization. The moment when the stalemate finally broke, when the Central Powers understood the war was unwinnable, and when the end, after years of mud fire and darkness, came into view. The guns still thunder as the offensive pushes on, and men still fall, and trenches still fill with rain and broken stone. But beneath these familiar horrors lies a new and unmistakable momentum. The war, at last, is beginning to drift toward silence. Part 17. The Armistice Morning. By the early days of November 1918, the idea that the war is ending travels quietly through the exhausted armies, not as a proclamation or a certainty, but as a rumor carried on half-spoken conversations and the subtle changes in the way officers hold themselves. Soldiers sense something shifting long before anyone dares to confirm it. They hear it in unfinished sentences, see it in the hesitation of couriers, and feel it in the unfamiliar absence of the old conviction that tomorrow will simply repeat today. After years of unbroken repetition, even the faint possibility of change feels unreal. Across the collapsing Central Powers, reality is catching up faster than any rumor. Bulgaria has already stepped out of the war. The Ottoman Empire has followed. Austria-Hungary dissolves into new, unsteady states, emerging one by one from the crumbling imperial shell. In Germany, the tension held tightly for 4 years finally snaps. Sailors refuse orders in Kiel. Workers leave factories as strikes spread, and crowds fill the streets carrying banners demanding peace rather than victory. The government falters, and the Kaiser, once the proud symbol of an empire, leaves in quiet exile. A fragile new republic rises in his place, aware that its first act must be to seek an armistice before the suffering of both army and nation becomes irreversible. The negotiations that determine the end of the war unfold in a railway carriage hidden in the grey quiet of the Compiègne forest, a place where tall bare trees have watched the turmoil of the Western Front pass beneath their branches for years. The air is cold and damp, sharp enough to turn every breath into a thin cloud. Inside the railway car, representatives of the Allied powers sit across from the German delegates, men who carry the fatigue of a country on their faces. They know they have no leverage. Their armies are disintegrating, their cities starving, their people unable to endure another winter. The terms placed before them are harsh, heavy, and absolute. Signing them is not a choice. It is the only remaining path. Pens move across the pages with trembling hands, and in that dimly lit carriage, far from any battlefield, the long war begins to close. The ceasefire is set for the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. When that morning finally arrives, the front wakes under a pale, colorless dawn. A cold mist drifts over the trenches, softening the broken landscape. Soldiers pull their coats tighter as they move through frost-hardened ground. Occasional artillery still fires in the distance, a reminder that the war continues until the very last second. Yet there is something different in the air, a faint stillness replacing the usual vibration of tension. It feels as though the world itself is waiting, listening. At 10:45, word moves along the trenches that only 15 minutes remain. Men react in ways as varied as their years of experience. Some stare in disbelief, uncertain if they should trust the message. Others sink down where they stand, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. A few weep openly, allowing the grief they carried through years of battle to finally surface. Many feel numb, too drained to produce anything as clear as joy or sorrow. Officers check their watches repeatedly, desperate to believe that the numbers approaching 11 are real. Gunfire does not stop immediately. Artillery continues to thunder in many sectors, as if the war is reluctant to release its grip. Machine guns still chatter. Bullets still slice through the cold air. Yet beneath the noise lies a growing awareness that these are the final sounds of a conflict that has consumed a generation. At 10:59, the front vibrates with all the violent familiarity of the past 4 years. Explosions rolling through the distance, rifles cracking sharply, the air trembling under the weight of destruction. Men across the lines pause in whatever they are doing, sensing the nearness of a moment larger than themselves. Time slows as the final seconds approach. Then, at precisely 11 o'clock, everything stops. The silence arrives not as a gentle fading, but as a sudden, overwhelming stillness that falls across the entire front like a great weight. The guns stop, the rifles stop, the shells stop. Even the echoes seem to hesitate before retreating into the cold morning air. For the first time since 1914, there is no sound of war. The quiet is so complete, so abrupt, that it feels almost unnatural. A silence filled not with peace, but with the memory of all that preceded it. Men stand motionless in the trenches, as if they fear that any shift might shatter the fragile stillness. Slowly, some remove their helmets, others bow their heads. No words are exchanged. The silence is too deep for that, too crowded with the presence of those who did not live to hear it. Yet it is silence nonetheless, and it spreads gently across a continent that had forgotten what such quiet felt like. After a long pause, the front begins to move again, cautiously, almost timidly. A few soldiers light cigarettes with hands that still tremble. Others wipe their faces, unsure whether the moisture on their cheeks is from cold air or tears. Relief mixes with disbelief. Some men laugh, a raw, uneven laugh that seems to rise from the very edge of exhaustion. For many, the end of the war feels too large to grasp. Behind the lines, the news awakens crowds into sudden, overwhelming joy. Bells ring across France. In Paris, people pour into the boulevards. In London, Big Ben tolls again after years of silence. Cities on both sides of the ocean erupt in celebration. Berlin gathers not in triumph, but in weary uncertainty, aware that peace brings its own challenges. But along the front, the place where the war truly lived, the mood is softer, quieter, shaped not by celebration, but by reflection. Soldiers look out over the wreckage, the churned soil, the rusted wire, and the trenches carved deep by years of fear and endurance. They remove their helmets, close their eyes, and let the silence settle. Some murmur small prayers. Others whisper the names of friends whose voices they will carry into the rest of their lives. Many simply stand, absorbing the moment as though it is too delicate to touch. This is armistice morning, a moment vast enough to hold the weight of an entire world, a silence strong enough to echo across generations. The guns have fallen quiet, the air is clear, and Europe, wounded but breathing, listens to the sound of itself again. Part 18. The wounds that wouldn't heal. The guns have gone silent, but the silence is not gentle. It presses against the world like a weight, heavy with everything the war has taken. Soldiers who once lived minute to minute under fire now find themselves facing long, uncertain days where the danger has vanished, but the memories have not. The armistice ends the killing, but it does not end the war inside the men who survived it. In the frozen days of late 1918 and early 1919, millions begin their long journey home, walking, limping, riding in crowded trains whose windows reflect tired faces staring into nothing. Europe is calm again, but the calm feels fragile, almost artificial, like a sheet of thin ice over deep water. The wounds that remain are not only physical, they are buried deeper, in the mind, in the heart, in the land itself. On the Western Front, soldiers gather their packs and rifles and step out of trenches for the last time. They walk carefully, as if afraid the earth might swallow them again. Many have forgotten how to stand upright after years of crouching under shell fire. Their boots sink into churned earth that has frozen overnight, hiding the bones and rusted metal beneath. They pass through battlefields they hardly recognize, now quiet, cold, and stripped of fear. Craters filled with stagnant water reflect the pale sky. Shattered trees rise like black skeletons. Barbed wire, heavy with frost, droops like tired vines. Villages they once fought for are nothing but piles of brick and splintered wood. In some sectors, the bodies of the fallen still lie where they fell, marked only by helmets placed on sticks or by rough wooden crosses hammered into the soil. For years, burial parties will comb the countryside, gathering remains gently into blankets or stretchers, whispering names when they can find them, numbers when they cannot. The war has ended, but the dead remain. When the soldiers move through towns on their way home, civilians come out to greet them, not with cheers alone, but with long, searching looks. They stand on doorsteps, unsure whether to clap or cry. Mothers reach for sons they barely recognize. Wives touch the faces of husbands aged 10 years in 4. Children hide behind skirts, shy around men whose eyes have changed. The soldiers smile when they can, but the smiles rarely reach their eyes. Some carry wounds wrapped in bandages. Some carry wounds that bandages cannot touch. There are tremors in their hands, sudden flinches at loud noises, sleepless nights filled with visions of wire and mud. Doctors call it shell shock, but the term is too small for what the war has carved into them. Some men wake screaming long after peace has settled over their homes. Some cannot bear to sit in quiet rooms. Some need noise, any noise, because silence feels too much like the moment before a bombardment. Others retreat inward, speaking little, their thoughts wandering through ruined landscapes no one else can see. Factories reopen, markets fill again, roads echo with carts and laughter. But beneath the surface, society strains to adjust. Millions return from the front, expecting to reclaim their old lives. Apprentices, clerks, farmers, students, only to find their places changed. Jobs have shifted, prices have risen, homes have been lost. A man who once plowed his family's field may find it littered with old shell cases. A tailor may return to a shop reduced to rubble. A teacher may come home to an empty house, its windows broken, its garden overgrown, and everywhere the missing leaf gaps that no rebuilding can fill. Chairs at dining tables remain empty. Photographs are placed on mantels with trembling hands. Families wait for footsteps that never return. Grief becomes a companion in every household, a soft voice in every room, a shadow at every meal. The war touches not only people, but the land itself. Across northern France and Belgium stretches the scar known as the Zone Rouge, the red zone, where soil is poisoned by chemicals, littered with shells, bones, and metal. Farmers are forbidden to plow it. Foresters will not walk through it. Even decades later, rusted shells rise from the earth after storms, their contents still dangerous. Villages wiped out entirely. Places like Fleury and Beaumont are never rebuilt. They remain as ghost villages, marked by signs that read, "Died for France," their streets remembered only by maps from before the war. The land remembers the war more faithfully than most people can bear. In hospitals, nurses tend to men whose bodies have been broken in ways the Era S medicine can barely address. Artificial limbs clatter softly on tiled floors. faces reconstructed with early plastic surgery carry the marks of both bravery and tragedy. Men learn to walk again, to speak again, to breathe without pain. Yet many wounds remain invisible. Officers who once commanded battalions now sit alone in gardens, listening to birdsong with a mixture of wonder and sorrow. Artillerymen wake with shaking hands, unable to keep the memories from rising like smoke. Pilots who soared through clouds cannot bear the sight of open skies. Infantrymen avoid crowds. The movement reminds them of advancing lines. The war has ended, but it has changed the way they inhabit the world. Civilians, too, carry their share of scars. Women who kept farms, factories, and families alive now face a return to the old expectations, uncertain how to fit back into roles they outgrew during the war. Parents who buried sons must navigate quiet homes and long, echoing days. Children who grew up with rationing and sirens and newsprint lists of the dead learn slowly that life does not always move with such heaviness. And yet, beneath the grief, beneath the fatigue, beneath the wounds, life begins again. Shops reopen, church bells ring, fields are plowed, schools fill with children once more. Laughter slowly returns, soft and strange at first, then more familiar. Europe does not heal quickly, but it breathes. Still the war's presence lingers everywhere, in vacant fields, where crosses stand in long rows, in quiet moments when a man looks to the sky, expecting the drone of aircraft, in sudden pauses, when a woman hears thunder and feels her heart tighten. Peace, like war, is a process, slow, fragile, uneven. The wounds that would not heal shape the years to come, the sorrow, the bitterness, the hope, the silence, the memories carried by millions who survived a world that broke itself. These scars do not fade easily, but they are part of the story now, woven into every family, every village, every nation touched by the war. The world has stopped fighting, but it has not forgotten. Part 19. The treaty that tried to bind a broken world. Winter returns to Europe with a stillness that seems almost gentle from afar, laying soft layers of snow across the ruins left behind. Shell holes fill quietly. Broken rafters disappear beneath drifting white. Empty trenches vanish under a thin, cold blanket. But beneath this peaceful surface lies a continent still fractured, its armies returned, but its nations unsure of their shape, its empires collapsed, but its grief standing unshaken. The war has ended, yet real peace has not yet taken hold. The quiet is only an interlude, while the world figures out how to continue. It is into this fragile landscape that the leaders of the victorious nations arrive in Paris in early 1919. Statesmen, generals, economists, and diplomats converging with the daunting task of shaping a peace that might hold a shattered world together. The city swells with their presence. Soldiers, aides, interpreters, journalists, and delegates from across 5 continents crowd its streets. Cars rattle along cobblestones, slick with winter rain. Cafes hum with murmured speculation, and hotels overflow with visitors wrapped in heavy coats as trains unload new arrivals day after day. Within the grand halls of the Palace of Versailles, chandeliers glow over tables piled with maps and statistics. Ink dries in hastily refilled pots, and guards walk the marble floors in steady, echoing steps. The air itself feels stretched between hope and anxiety, thick with the awareness that these rooms hold the responsibility of shaping more than borders. They hold the future. At the center of the negotiations stand the so-called Big Four. Woodrow Wilson arrives with an idealistic vision of a lasting peace built on principles such as national self-determination and open diplomacy. Clemenceau brings the hard resolve of a nation that has endured devastation and vows never to face such suffering again. Lloyd George navigates between public demands for retribution and his belief that a stable world requires restraint. Orlando seeks the territorial promises he believes his country earned through sacrifice, Around them gather dozens of smaller countries, delegations from new or aspiring states, representatives of colonized peoples hoping to be heard, and observers from regions whose futures are being shaped in rooms where they have little voice. Poland seeks borders after a century of partition. Czechoslovakia seeks legitimacy. Armenia seeks safety. The Middle East is divided without its people in the room. Germany is absent, waiting for summons that will not allow genuine negotiation. Every discussion feels weighted with the memory of the war. Every compromise seems fragile. Every promise carries the scent of future conflict. When Germany's delegation finally arrives in May 1919, they do so not as participants, but as witnesses to decisions already made. Escorted through the Hall of Mirrors, a place chosen with symbolic precision, they are presented with a treaty immense in scope and unforgiving in tone. The document lists the loss of territory in both East and West, the surrender of all overseas colonies, severe restrictions on the army and navy, heavy reparations that will burden the nation for generations, and most painfully, the clause placing sole responsibility for the war on Germany. They protest, argue, plead, but the Allied leaders remain unmoved. France sees security in harshness. Britain sees justice for the dead. Wilson sees a compromise that he hopes the League of Nations will soften in time. Germany, weakened by starvation, political collapse, and the fear of renewed fighting, sees no choice at all. And so, on June 28, 1919, 5 years to the day after the assassination at Sarajevo, the treaty is signed. For ordinary Europeans, the news brings a mixture of relief and uncertainty. Church bells ring in Paris. Families gather around radios in London. Newspapers in New York declare, "Peace at last." In small villages from the Baltic to the Balkans, people ask quietly what the future will look like. But the soldiers who endured the trenches respond differently. Some believe the treaty necessary, others worry it is too punitive, and still others think it is too lenient. Many who visit Versailles in later years walk through its chambers with a sense of emptiness, feeling the dissonance between the grandeur of the setting and the rawness of the memories carried by those who fought. To them, the treaty seems less like peace and more like a formal attempt to mask wounds that have not yet healed. Across Europe, borders shift with unsettling speed. The Austro-Hungarian Empire dissolves entirely. Austria becomes a small republic. Hungary loses large portions of its territory. A mosaic of new nations appears, a reborn Poland, a culturally mixed Czechoslovakia, a newly forged Yugoslavia, and the Baltic states rising along the northern coast. But the lines drawn on maps do not always match the complex realities of language, culture, or history. Minorities find themselves suddenly living under new flags. Some borders cut through communities like scars. Peace, written in ink, does not always find a home in the hearts of those who must live with it. Meanwhile, Wilson's dream of the League of Nations takes form in Geneva, a place where delegates speak of diplomacy, arbitration, and disarmament as tools for preventing future wars. But the League begins with structural weaknesses that undermine its purpose. It has no military force, relies on mutual goodwill, and, in a twist of irony, is immediately weakened by the refusal of the United States Senate to join. History would later echo with the quiet tragedy of that missed opportunity. As months pass, Europe moves unevenly toward recovery. Cities rebuild their ruins brick by brick. Farmers clear fields still littered with old shells. Families pack medals and letters into drawers while they wait for news of loved ones who never returned. Veterans sit in cafes staring into the distance or gather with comrades to speak softly of battles that shaped and scarred them. Teachers reopen classrooms with empty desks that overshadow the lessons. Children grow up playing near monuments that rise in almost every square. Merchants reopen shops beside buildings still marked by shrapnel. The continent stitches itself back together in fragments. A quilt both beautiful and frayed. The Treaty of Versailles stands as an attempt to impose order on chaos, to mend the deep wounds left by years of destruction. But beneath its signatures lies a truth that many sensed even then. The world it tries to bind is not ready to be whole. It cannot force healing. It cannot undo grief. It cannot guarantee peace. Yet in that summer of 1919, it is enough to let Europe breathe, to let families imagine a future again, to let the world experience the fragile miracle of silence. The ink dries slowly on the treaty. The chandeliers flicker in the long halls of Versailles, and somewhere across the recovering continent, a child born in the shadow of war listens to the quiet outside and does not yet understand how precious such quiet truly is. Part 20. The Long Shadow. The war ends, the treaties are inked, and the armies scatter back to the lands they left behind. Yet the world they return to is no longer the one they knew. Nations begin, slowly and unevenly, to rebuild the shape of everyday life, but the threads of history have been so deeply pulled apart that nothing can be woven back exactly as it once was. The Great War lingers like a quiet residue in the corners of streets, in the gestures of strangers, in the heaviness of families waiting for news that will not come, and in the stillness that falls between heartbeats. It settles over the years ahead like a thin mist, transparent in places yet impossible to ignore, a reminder that peace, though restored, is fragile and resting uneasily on wounds that remain raw beneath the surface. In the early 1920s, Europe tries to resume its old rhythms. Spring returns with its rains tapping against city windows. Summer light warms fields that had once been cratered landscapes. Autumn leaves drift through villages where children play again in open squares. Yet beneath these ordinary movements lies the unmistakable imprint of the war. Countless men walk with altered bodies, missing limbs, stiffened joints, wounds that ache in winter. Many more carry injuries no one can see. Hospitals remain full long after the firing stops. Empty chairs around breakfast tables remind entire towns how deeply the war has carved into daily life. Conversations settle differently now. Some people avoid speaking of the past, others cannot escape it, and many discover that the laughter they once shared echoes strangely, as though something in them no longer matches the world around them. Children who grew up in the war years search fields and ditches for relics they do not understand. Rusted helmets, fragments of metal, scraps of uniforms. They treat these objects as curiosities, while older villagers watch with a quiet sorrow, remembering the thunder of artillery that once rolled through the same hills. Even the air seems altered, free of the smoke that choked entire regions, yet carrying a faint, persistent memory of what it once held. Across the continent, artists, writers, and thinkers try to understand what has happened. Some capture the ruined trenches as scars across canvases. Some craft poems that echo with mud gas and loss. Others shape memorials of stone bronze and names, endless lists of sons, brothers, husbands, and friends carved so long they often bend around the very monuments they adorn. Families visit these names, tracing the letters slowly, knowing that each represents not a statistic, but a world. The war becomes a story retold in every household, though not as one single narrative, but as thousands of intertwined threads. A soldier who returned home silent, a nurse who carried final messages from the dying, a mother who waited until her final day, a father who tucked his son's uniform into a drawer and never touched it again, a child who learned early what absence feels like. Over time, the war embeds itself into the soul of Europe. Nations struggle to find stability in the wake of collapse. Germany grapples with economic burden, political upheaval, and layers of resentment. Austria and Hungary shrink into anxious new republics. Russia, already torn by revolution, falls further into civil war. Britain adjusts to a world where its traditions no longer shield it from the rapid pace of change. France rebuilds its devastated northern countryside inch by inch. Across the ocean, the United States steps into a new global role, more confident and aware that its own future is now bound to the rest of the world. Everything feels suspended between possibility and instability, as though the very ground beneath the century is still trembling from the war's final shock waves. The 1920s bring new machines and inventions, radios humming gently in homes, automobiles rattling down roads dusted with sunlight, aircraft stitching faint lines across clear skies. Life gradually resumes its momentum, often with excitement, sometimes with restlessness, always with the quiet knowledge that something irretrievable lies behind it. Veterans gather in parks, cafes, and small public squares, sharing cigarettes and half-told stories, glancing at younger generations who cannot fully understand the weight carried in those few words. Some find comfort in routine, some in companionship, and some never fully cross the threshold back into ordinary life. Yet still, the world continues to move. The Great War was once believed to be the conflict that would end all conflicts, a final lesson so severe that humanity would never again walk into such devastation. But history does not respond easily to hope. Peace imposed through treaties proves unable to contain the tensions under the surface. Economic crises stir old rivalries. Political movements rise in the unsettled spaces left by collapsed empires. Bitterness takes root where borders shift and promises fail. The shadow cast by the war stretches long into the decades ahead, not as an echo, but as a living presence. The redrawn states, the grievance embedded in defeated nations, the grief handed down from parents to children, the unresolved questions tucked into the very structure of international politics. Yet even in this shadow, something resilient survives, the quiet instinct that, despite damage, people rebuild. Families mend their homes and fill them with new laughter. Towns restore their streets and markets. Children chase each other across ground once carved by trenches. Farmers return to their soil, turning over land that holds memories deeper than they can express. Teachers open windows to allow the light of a new morning to fall across desks once left empty. Strangers offer help to others in ways that surprise them, as if the war taught them both vulnerability and a desire to protect one another. The world carries its scars, but it does not collapse beneath them. In that endurance lies a truth that no treaty or speech can fully capture, that humanity, even when broken, remembers how to stand. And now, as this long, gentle journey through the Great War reaches its end, take a moment to draw a slow breath and imagine the fields of France in the early light, where grass grows over the trenches and wildflowers move softly in places where barbed wire once clung to the earth. Imagine a world exhaling after years of strain, allowing a fragile peace to settle across its surface. The war itself has receded into history, but the memories persist, carried by those who lived through it and by the generations who inherit their stories. The lessons endure as quietly as the morning air. This was the Great War, a shadow that stretched across a century, a chapter the world continues to interpret and reinterpret, a reminder of how deeply suffering and resilience can shape the human spirit. Before we part, here is a small, gentle note. If drifting through this long, quiet piece of history brought you any sense of calm or reflection, you may leave a like, or simply let the story settle and guide you toward rest. If you wish to hear more quiet journeys like this someday, you can subscribe, but only if it feels right to you. Thank you for spending this time here, under soft light and quiet skies, listening to a world that once thundered and now murmurs softly in memory. The world remembers you,